study session for the board on 5/26 at 9 a.m. We'll begin with, first, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome. I know this is 9 a.m. so we are used to seeing each other at 6 a.m.
6 p.m.
We will first have a hearing session. Are there any?
No, we don't have any comments.
Great, so no comments. So we will now go to Learning Recovery Program Study Session, and I believe I'll be returning this. Oh, yes, the flag salute. We will have the flag salute. Mrs. Norby, would you lead us in the flag salute?
Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And now we'll turn this over for a presentation on our Learning Recovery Program Study Session. I'll be turning it over to you, Mrs. Martin and Mrs. Norby.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Lieber. Good morning, Governing Board, members of Cabinet, and whoever might be out in our virtual world watching. I want to thank you for coming to our meeting on, as you said, Mrs. Lieber, in the early morning as opposed to in the evening. We have what we think is a really exciting plan to show you this morning. Dr. Singh is unable to be here this morning, so Mrs. Martin and I will be showing you our presentation and going through this plan with you. The purpose of our meeting today really is to adopt the three-year learning plan, the Extended Learning Opportunities Grant. That's our main purpose, but we really wanted to do that in a context of a bigger picture. This is one pot of money, as you know, from all of the governor's budgets that you've been listening to and all of the presentations that Mrs. Martin has been doing for us since last spring. We've been receiving lots of different pots of money for different things. Some of those plans require board approval or adoption, some don't, but this one does. And this one had to be adopted by June 1st, which is why we couldn't wait until first meeting in June. However, as I said, we wanted to do it in a broader context. And so we'll be talking about the Extended Learning Opportunities Grant, or what we call ELO, throughout the meeting, but we'll get to the gist of it at the end of the meeting. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We've called this Recovery to Discovery, and Mrs. Martin will be talking about exactly how that quote came to be in just a little bit. Well, here we go. And we did test.
I bet you even tested it 5
We
minutes.
did. We did. So if Dr. Singh were here, she would be doing this slide for us, but I just wanted to share with you on her behalf that when we create any type of a plan in Fallbrook, or when we begin to do any type of planning, we do it with these goals in mind. We want to make sure that whatever we're providing is sustainable. It's not a one-time shot in the arm and we don't ever go back and look at it again. We want to make sure that they are research-based strategies and that we're not just taking the latest whim that might be out there for us. And more importantly, as Mrs. Martin says, maximizing our funding, that the right funds are being used for the right purposes, because certain funds can only be used for certain things and other things can be used for other things. So you want to make sure you get them out of the right place. And then in this particular case, it has to supplement current effective practices. It couldn't be that you went and paid for something that you were already doing. Okay, you had to supplement what you were doing for the purposes of this grant. So we're going to provide for you a little background and context today. We're actually going to share our 3-year plan with you. The Extended Learning Opportunities Grant is just a 1-year pot of money, but it's part of this 3-year plan that Cabinet has put together for you. And then we're going to share with you all of the different funding sources up to this point. Certainly our main objective to adopt the ELO grant, and then to talk about next steps and to have you understand where this fits into the bigger picture.
My turn. So we're going to kind of tag team this here. So good morning, everyone. As we were preparing for this presentation and even prior to the presentation, I'm a very visual person. And so as we talked about it, we kept referring to things as layers of funding. And of course, we had different analogies. Mine all seem to come back to food, you know, a cake or a parfait or whatever. Instead, we came up with something that everyone universally hopefully could understand, and we called it the layered triangle. And so you'll notice at the bottom, the blue color there at the base, that is our typical ongoing year-to-year operational expenses. It's what we need to run the basic operations, your classroom teachers, principals, custodians, utilities, things like that. And in that you'll see, and you've heard about in prior years, as just part of our general fund operating budget. The next layer up, if you were listening to the Governors May Revise at the School Services Provided or any of the other organizations, there was a lot of talk about all of this money that school districts are going to be receiving for next year. Most of what is being proposed comes in the form of one-time funding. So there's a lot of one-time money being proposed there. It hasn't been finalized yet. It's going through its process, but that's just an additional layer that would be on top of what our base, what we call, like I said, the base or the foundation of our budget is. The next layer that you see in orange is our supplemental and concentration, which we've had for a while now. But this again, you can see that some of the examples of the expenses that I included there, and you're going to have a lot more detail on that when we do our LCAP, the first reading at our first board meeting in June. The piece that we're talking about today specifically is that very top of the triangle, and it's our learning recovery money. And there's really two major pots, although our district actually has three, and we'll talk about that as we get into the funding sources. But the two major pots of money that we're talking about come one from the federal level with the ESSER funds, and then two with the state funding that they're putting towards it with the AB 86 money you may have heard about. The AB 86 coronavirus relief package for California was signed into law by Governor Newsom back, I believe, at the beginning of March. And so this is something that's different because it was done in the middle of the year. Usually those things happen when the budget's adopted. The only other time that I recall things like this was when they were actually making cuts to the budget, where they made mid-year cuts. So to actually have some things added to it, I know we had it late last year with some of the pandemic funding, but this came about, and the reason it came about, there's two pots. One specifically, it was to get schools just to reopen. The in-person instruction grant was really, let's get schools open. It was a lot of the basic necessities that school districts would need just to be able to open up for in-person instruction. The second part of that is what Mrs. Norby was referring to as the ELO, the acronym for Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant. And that is really to focus on the recovery of the learning that has been lost during this time, and what kind of programs and things are we going to put in place to do that. So what we're focusing on today is really that top part of the triangle, the red piece there. So I'll go to the next slide.
I just have a quick question
Yes.
on the ELO. So it's one-time funding, all of it, the federal and the state.
Correct.
And we lose it if we don't spend it, or can it be rolled over to future years?
We have until August of 2022 to use those funds. So we don't have to use it obviously all by this, the end of this school year. It actually goes into the next school year. And we'll show you as part of the plan how we'll be able to do that and actually take one-year funding and make it a 3-year plan. So that's part of the maximizing of our funding. But yes, we can use it into next school year. Okay, so next slide here. So when I was talking about what we were presenting in this program, and I often share these ideas with my husband and my daughter, because it doesn't matter how good of a presentation that I think I'm doing, if nobody understands it, then it really isn't that good of a presentation. So I often like to share this with my own family to make sure, am I making sense? And do you understand what I was saying? And am I being clear? And try to use less jargon and acronyms and make it understandable. So as I was talking with my family about it, we were talking about it's a 3-year plan, with the first year being the learning recovery. So we have that, set there. The second year, hopefully we're not having to do so much of the recovery because we addressed a lot of that in the first year. And by the third year, it's really something of more of a discovery of not just we recovered from things, but we're actually advanced, we're beyond, we're taking something and making it so that it's not just an intervention piece for those that are at risk or in need of that, but it's a program that we're taking what we know and accelerating it for all of the students. So as I was talking about it, my daughter and my husband were talking about anyone that's a UFC fan or mixed martial arts fan knows who Conor McGregor is. And like him or not, one of his quotes, and that's my husband said, you know, he said something about this, is that an injury is not just a process of recovery, it's a process of discovery. And although the learning loss caused by the pandemic is not the same as an injury from going a few rounds in a mixed martial arts fight, although I think Miss Norby and I sometimes feel like we knocked around a few times there, it's still that this message applies, which is, you know, we really have the opportunity to look at what did we do well, what can we improve on, and let's make it not just a 1 year kind of shot in the dark and hope that it works. Let's really make it something that we have thought about strategically, that we've put some careful planning into, and really make it something that, you know, 1 year perhaps isn't enough to see the results or to see how effective it was, but 3 years, it's enough time that we will be able to see our progress, adjust, and it kind of just goes along with the LCAP being a 3-year plan and some of these others. So it was really important to us that while the minimum requirement is only a 1-year plan for spending these ELO grant funds, our district has looked at it and said, what do we want to do over a 3-year period, and how can we pay for that beyond just what the state and the federal government is providing?
Well, it's been quite a year. When Mrs. Martin's talking about discovery, we've discovered a lot this year, without a doubt. But you know, public education, all teachers across this country, this world, have been asked to really rediscover education this year, and they've done a really, really great job. I'm very proud of what we've done here in Fallbrook. Our teachers had to navigate 100% distance learning. They had to navigate blended learning. They had to then bring all the kids back with social distancing and masks. And it's really been a charge for them. And they have done it beautifully, with grace and with passion. And for that, I'm very, very proud. But the planning and the implementation of all of this was very intentional. As we've said all along, Dr. Singh from the very beginning, back in March, said this is not going to be a 2-week thing. And so we need to be planning for it. And it was that careful planning that then allowed us, I think, to be able to have the successes that we've had this year. But all of that doesn't come without a cost. It has been a very expensive endeavor. The good news is we were in really good fiscal shape that we could begin putting into place some of those things even before we knew we were going to get this money, or certainly before we had it. And that included making sure our staff was properly trained, making sure our students had internet, making sure our students had devices to access the curriculum, making sure that we were looking at curriculum this year and assessments for this year that would allow us to really monitor their progress. So that was the good news. And the even better news is that now we have money for it. And now we are starting to get money for it. The bad news that comes with that is that so much of this money comes with a plan that you have to write. So Ms. Martin and I are joking that it's just plans, plans, plans. We're just writing plans. We really wish they could have figured out a way to put them all into one plan. But you know, they came from different sources and different places. So the really good part for us, though, is that all of the plans don't require board approval or adoption, but all of the plans require stakeholder engagement. That is universal across every plan. And you can use some of your previous stakeholder engagement, but for this particular plan, you had to receive new stakeholder engagement specifically around learning recovery. But the great thing for us is that across every stakeholder group, no matter when we did it or how we did it or with whom we did it, our responses were consistent. And boy, that makes it a lot easier to write a plan or to write 5 plans. There was consistency with the board, with our governing board, with our teachers, with our staff. So as we then began to look at this, not as 5 little individual plans, but as a master plan for our district there were things that we had to keep in mind. And the first one, as Mrs. Martin mentioned, was that we really wanted a 3-year plan. So the LCAP is a 3-year plan, but we wanted a 3-year plan that was using all of these funds. We know that it was required to have stakeholder voice in all of them, and that we wanted the plans to reflect our district's priorities. Those district priorities certainly come from stakeholder voice, as well as data that we receive, whether it's social emotional data or whether it's academic data. And in this particular case, it had to supplement the current program. So we had to look at what were we already doing? What additional things would we do? That has to come out of this pot then. So back to that maximizing our funding.
Just a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
We're not able, because I know you pre-spent a lot of money to make this work. We're not able to backfill.
Ms. Martin will talk about that. Yes, she will. Yeah, because she is the master of
I bet she
maximizing
was.
that funding.
So this funding that we're talking about, the ELO,
Mhm.
is that tied to the AB 86?
Yes,
That's the money from AB 86, and the ESSER is separate.
yes. Yeah. And we've got a nice little color coded chart for you that hopefully will
Coming
help
up, huh?
you understand it, like it helped us understand it. So again, as I said, all of our stakeholder groups were very consistent in what they wanted for our kids. Academic achievement, of course, was number one, and they wanted us to continue to provide high quality instruction, but they also wanted us to know what were the gaps that our students might have because of lost instructional time, and how are we going to address that. We've certainly had lots of conversations here about that in terms of literacy and the importance of literacy and what our younger students might have missed because of the pandemic. That was universal. Our teachers said the same thing. Our board said the same thing across the board. But the interesting thing about that was equally as loud of a voice was that we want that, but not at the expense of other things. We don't want to just focus on ELA and mathematics. We want our children to have a broad course of study. We want an expansion of the arts in our classrooms. We want to have more environmental experiences for our students. We want to continue to have qualified PE teachers and getting our kids outside. So that also consistent across the groups. Social emotional has always been a focus in Fallbrook, but this year it was louder than ever. And of course, we can understand why. And this came from our parents, certainly, who are watching their children at home and knowing that the elements that they may come to school with in now and in the future. Also from our teachers. And this year, the federal government and the state government are saying, and you need to also be addressing the social emotional well-being of your staff and your families, not just your students. So that was very loud in our voice. Of course, safe schools. They wanted to make sure we had proper PPE. They wanted to make sure that we had social distancing and that we were following all of the CDPH guidelines, that we had staff in place to make sure that our children were safe. And then family engagement. Today's plan that we're going to talk about has a small family engagement portion to it, but our LCAP that you'll see next month has a very large family engagement component. But those were the 5 things that were loud and clear across every group. And you will see it in this plan, and you will see it in the LCAP, and you will see it in our priorities as we move forward. So when we look at each of those areas, what you'll see in this plan as we walk through it, and again, as I said, with the LCAP, are these types of things embedded in this plan as well as others. But I just kind of wanted to give you an overview, and then we'll get down to the specifics of the ELO plan. I don't need to read these to you. I'll highlight a few. Certainly our literacy coaches are going to be a huge impact for us next year. Dr. Curcio and I had an opportunity to meet with them this past week for their first introductory meeting. We've already loaded them up on books. We already have them signed up for 3 professional developments over the summer. And of course, they have been on our ELA adoption committee all along as we're moving forward. And then we are doing reading intervention, additional reading intervention teachers. We're going to continue doing our after school tutoring next year. So those are some of the things that we're doing to add to this area. PE teachers we've always had, well, for many years in this district, but we are really exploring now with some of this extra funding, expanded fine arts opportunities for our students. You know that we've used luminary arts in the past for kind of shots in the arm, but we're in the process of meeting with them to really see what kind of a robust curriculum can they provide for us. As opposed to hiring our own arts teachers or putting it on the shoulders of our teachers to increase those opportunities. We're thinking that if we have somebody who this is their area of expertise and their passion, and we are familiar with their work and familiar with what they do, how can they come and help us? The Kids College is another one that is a resource that we can use. So we're looking at mass expansions to that. And then so excited to bring our innovation labs back online next year, as well as what we talked about at our last meeting, that expanded environmental education program for TK through 8. So those are some of the new things that are coming. Schools of choice is just continuing May Ellis, Fallbrook STEM Academy, the virtual academy, as Mrs. Lundin was talking about. We've had counselors. We are exploring the option of a social worker to come on board with us this next year. Many districts have had social workers already, and it's a common hiring for this next year as we try to really coordinate community services out there and give our families more support in this area. You know that we've expanded our behavior techs to full-time at each school as opposed to part-time. We're very excited about that. And Mr. Rodriguez has been setting up some professional developments in the area of social emotional learning for us next year, and kind of renewing our knowledge on trauma-informed practices and restorative circles and some of the other things that help reduce school suspensions, increase attendance, and make our schools feel more welcoming and accepting for our students, and make it a place where they want to come. And then the operations, you know, all of these things, they're most things that we've already done. Our day camps, additional custodians, PPE, all of those things that we had to do to get our schools open and be ready to go. Yes.
Facility modifications, what was that?
So those might be things like the hand washing stations. It might be where we had to close the drinking fountains and bring another what. So those types of modifications that we had to do to keep the facility safe.
Thanks.
Mhm. And then ventilation, we all know more about MERV ventilators, whatever those are. Yeah. Okay. So that's just kind of an overview of all of the stakeholder engagement and kind of where the highlights of where you'll be seeing how we're going to address those needs that our stakeholders said that they have and that they would want us to do in our different plans. And so then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Martin so she can kind of now give you kind of that budget piece. You have the stakeholder input and then this budget piece.
Thank you. So this chart here, we've called it many different things, but I think we landed on the Girl Scout cookie
Yes.
chart or something because of the color coding. This chart here represents the funds that we're talking about for the 3-year plan here. In it, you'll see that the first one being our COVID-19 contingency reserve. As you recall from our second interim presentation, we had identified money that was for planning. It's in our reserves, and we titled it COVID-19 contingency for things that we knew were coming up, but we weren't quite sure how it was going to affect us or impact us. So that $2.8 million is money we already have. It's in our reserves, and it set aside for as a response to the pandemic. The second column there, the funding, the blue column there, is the ESSER 2 funds. So as you recall, we had the ESSER 1 round, and well, at the time we didn't know it was ESSER 1 because we didn't know there was going to be a 2. But this is actually the funding that was approved back at the end of December. And so again, this money has already been allocated to districts. It's not subject to just a proposal or things like that. This is already allocated to districts. The third and the fourth column, the kind of green and pink column up there, those are our AB 86 dollars. And again, there are 2 major sources of funding for school districts. One being the in-person instruction grant, and you know, we all love acronyms, IPI, and then one being the expanded learning opportunities grant. And up there are the dollar amounts that are for our district, and you can see that it totals $12.4 million roughly. So when we took that number and we divided it over a 3-year period, we have a little over $4 million to spend over a 3-year period. When we fine tune that, you know, we were spending a little bit more in the first year because to get it going and do things. And then hopefully, for an example, by the 3rd year, we don't need as much cleaning and disinfecting. So we can reduce that cost there. But again, add more to the summer bridge program, let's say, so that more students can participate. So, but just this was to give you just an overall view and understand these are funds that we already have, not subject to proposal or not part of the May revise. that have already been approved. And I believe some of it we've actually already received. I know we already have our own contingency. That's our own general fund money. But that contingency, I do want to spend a little bit of time on it. We can go to the next slide. You know, is a reminder, because it's something that the district should be very proud of, the board should be very proud of. We began COVID planning back in January of 2020, not 21, 2020. And I still remember at the time thinking, what? We're going to set aside how much for what? What is it? You know, having heard of the coronavirus, but not thinking that it was going to have quite the impact that it did. So we began back then under Dr. Singh's leadership of setting aside funds. She started having planning meetings just in case. And, you know, that really is the first key thing that put us in such a good place for all of these other things to happen. It allowed us to open up before others. It allowed us, I mean, without that, we would have been kind of perhaps waiting with other districts to find out what can we do or what funding sources are we going to use. But planning ahead for it and starting that planning before we actually were required to or needed to, it really put us in a good position financially. And then once you have the financial resources, you're able to plan better with then what can we do with that. So that, you know, that's just something that we should all be very proud of. I was mentioning to Cabinet that I was in a CBO meeting, Chief Business Officials meeting. It's a countywide group last week. And what I will admit was I didn't realize how competitive I actually am. Because I thought, oh, they're so far behind. They're things as far as what we're doing to increase our substitutes and the pay and what we've done for our teachers and the support and what we've done for our students. And we're just so far ahead of so many of what my colleagues are saying and the questions they're asking. And I'm just thinking, wow, you're just now asking that. I didn't say that. And it was a Zoom meeting. So, you know, they couldn't see me doing my victory dance in the end zone. But it really was a reminder, I guess, of just, we are doing some really great things here. Our kids, our families, our teachers, our staff deserve the best. And we're able to do that. And it's something that I'm proud of. And I know that, you know, others are as well. But it was just a reminder. And again, like I said, I didn't realize my competitive streak until I thought, oh, yes, you know, that we're at the right place doing the right things. The next funding source here, okay, let's see. There we go, is that we came to know about was the ESSER 2 funds. And this is the federal funding that, again, it's following very similar to the ESSER 1 round of funds. You can see it's quite a significant dollar amount for our district, $4.2 million. And it really is, it gives a lot of flexibility with what it can be done. I mean, literally it's things that address the impact of COVID-19. There are some restrictions on it and some timing of when it needs to be spent and you know, how it has to be reported. But we're really using this to support our learning recovery program as a component of it. Other districts are having to look at this and still be buying hand washing stations or renting, you know, they're still using this for the basic operational needs to open up their schools safely. We're much further along in that, so we don't have to use it for those types of things. And much like what you said, Mrs. Lieber, I have confirmed with the state that on these funding sources, because we have already done these things, and you know, when you read it and says you must open school by this, well, we were already open. Our allowable uses and what we can go back and do, that's exactly what we're able to do.
Wonderful.
Is so things that we had already budgeted for, like the lower class sizes, hiring more teachers for lower class sizes, that's absolutely an eligible expense. And so we can actually go back and charge some of the costs there. And what that does is it frees up our general fund money, our own money, to use how we determine to use and when we determine to use it. And that's really the key of how we can then fund this for 3 years.
I was wondering, I'm still waiting for the 3-year piece.
And so
I did the numbers and we.
exactly, because what's happened otherwise is we're gonna get like a boatload of money for 1 year and hurry up and spend it all before, you know, it runs out. And how do you possibly do that? Number one, but is that the most effective way to spend it and use it? So for us, it really provides, because we've already complied, we've already done the things we need to. Got the email from the state where I asked those questions, want to know specifically, checked with the auditors on it. And it's just a way that then gives us much more flexibility in how we determine what's best for these learning recovery programs and things that we want to offer. That again, like I said, other districts don't have that option necessarily. So
Mrs. Leibs. Did you have a
No, that's super smart. Thanks for figuring that out.
You know, things like our technology that we bought for all of our students, you know, some districts are just now in a position to do that when they receive these funds. We did that last year, you know, so.
So yes, we can almost reimburse ourselves
Right.
in a sense, and then use our general fund money to actually then end up funding what ends up being the third year of this program. The IPI grant, this one again, just so you know the details about it, districts were required to offer in-person instruction by April 1st. It could be a combination of in-person and hybrid, but there were certain groups that had to be offered. Your kindergarten through second grade, some of the others eligible that kind of generate the supplemental concentration grant funding, special ed. So there were certain groups, and we were already doing that. So again, many districts, this is an incentive grant, you know, get your schools open, get things. For us, I consider it a reward grant in a sense, because we were already doing these things. And actually, again, I heard a few times, how did you guys do that in Fallbrook? And I'm thinking, how did you not? It was really, but we can use it for any purpose consistent with providing in-person instruction. So again, the things that we've done to already be open since last October, you know, I looked at it and we truly were open 6 months prior back in October. And so while districts we found out about this funding source in March, and they were kind of scrambling and what are they going to do? We had already been doing it for, you know, a 6-month period successfully, no outbreaks. We didn't have to have closures because of it. And we responded to when there was you know, a positive COVID case or something. And it, while it wasn't the easiest, it was fairly seamless and painless for, you know, to the best that we could do it, you know, and we were able to make that transition much easier than others. The ELO, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant. So again, this is what the focus of our meeting at the end and the objective is to adopt the plan. This is, we must implement a learning recovery program. The state requires it for 1 year. We're providing it for 3. It must be used for specific purposes that Mrs. Norby will go over, that again, they have to supplement things. They have to be additional things you're doing, not just things you're already doing. 10% of this grant is required to be spent on paraprofessionals. In other districts, larger districts, most of them up north, some districts had to make some tough choices, and they had to cut back, lay off, reduce some of their paraprofessional staffing. And because of that, and the governor had recognized that it's a requirement that the first objective be that you reinstate any of the paraprofessionals that you had to lay off or reduce hours. That wasn't the case for us. We are going to be recommending, and that's what we have mentioned already, the behavior technicians, additional behavior technicians, and then looking at our special ed assistants, that we have several part-time positions, and some of those are very difficult to fill. And so perhaps by making them one full-time position, it costs more, but in the end, we will hopefully be able to attract and retain some quality candidates that aren't, which I understand with that. And I can tell you, as a parent of a learning center child, that consistency with a special ed assistant and the teacher, but you know, with that is so important. You're talking about children who perhaps with autism or you know, are on the spectrum, that really one of the biggest challenges for them is change. And so to constantly have a revolving door, or who are you, it just really does set back for their progress. So it is a really important piece that we've thought about a lot, and we've made some great efforts and different things that we've done to be able to, with a stipend or, that we negotiated at one point, but really being able to focus that and bring that so that there's some more consistency and additional time that's allowed for those students will be a good thing. The last requirement of this is that 85% of the funds need to be spent on in-person instruction. So a district could use up to 15% for distance learning. But if you have listened again to any of the messages that have been coming out from the state, it really, the recommendation, the encouragement, the support is for bringing our students back for in-person instruction. We will still have a virtual option. It'll be a little bit more tied to our independent study program because that is what currently the legislation allows, but we still do want to provide that option for families where that is, their choice and it's important to them. But this grant required that we spend 85% on in-person and we're actually spending 100% of it on our in-person instruction.
So I'm just curious, we're doing these upscaling of our full-time faculty assists. What will happen in 3 years when we're no longer to be able to support that financially?
Well, hopefully within 3 years, and you've seen the funding that's been put towards school districts. One of the concerns is that a lot of it is one-time funding. However, some of it, like with the COLA and things like that, it does increase your base funding. So that base will continue to increase. The other part is you've probably heard about the proposals, and these are proposals, and yet they do have great momentum about increasing the amount of money we receive on a percentage basis for our supplemental concentration grant. And that's huge for this district. So beyond 3 years, well, I'll put it this way. I would have never thought 3 years ago that we would be here in this position with the pandemic having hit and those plans that we had 3 years ago were out the window. But in looking at, I think at the end of 3 years, it'll really help with prioritizing for the district what's important, what worked, what didn't, and what do we want to maintain. Sometimes those tough decisions have to be made at the expense of, hopefully it's not at the expense of anything. But when it comes to the priorities, if there's something that we find that really works, that comes out of this, that we want to continue. And I will tell you, that's happened, even just the difference between the distance learning that the students and teachers started off with, and then coming back, there's some practices and things that have happened that we learned in the distance learning that we want to continue to do even back in person, or even, and so taking the best practices from this, I think it'll really put us in a better position. The classified union, CSEA, part of the, with this 10% that needs to be spent on paraprofessionals, part of the stakeholder engagement was meeting with them because, they have an interest in negotiating. And I will tell you that the representative who represents San Diego schools, but that we had met with her, she was so happy. And I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but to know that we were thinking of this as 3 years, because the commitment a lot of districts are making is 1 year.
Okay.
So they were really looking at, what do you do when you increase or you add something for 1 year, and then you're looking at a layoff or a reduction the next year.
We are notifying them, though, that this is one-time funding that we've been able to expand. over the
Absolutely.
years.
And
So they're kind of prepared that
absolutely.
they might be going back without us all looking like the bad guy.
No, absolutely. And it's something that would continue regardless of this funding source. Anybody who is funded with what used to be called categoricals or restricted or, specialized set of money,
They know.
they receive a notice that, it's kind of always pending funding. We've been able to find other funding sources maybe to make up for when the state or federal government doesn't provide it, but it's always been that. So that practice would continue as far as this is, temporary or one-time funding. And so it is subject to, if you're funded that way, if there's a lack of funds or a lack of work, then that's subject to what would be a layoff. But again, I'm sorry,
Can I add to that?
yeah, sure, absolutely.
The other thing I would tell you is that these people that will be made full-time or people coming in to be hired full-time, we are spending that money now because those positions are going unfilled and we
True.
have to hire agencies to come in and fill
True.
those positions. So
Oh,
these,
That's a really good
these,
point.
these aren't like classrooms that are going to get additional aid time.
Right.
There are classes that have that aid time allocated to them and we can't retain staff to do it. So we are paying an outside agency an exorbitant amount of money
Oh, wow.
to provide these services that are required in a child's IEP. We've been over the last, well, since I've come to the district, but certainly over the last 3 years, been having conversations with HR about how do we attract, recruit, and retain special education aides so we don't have to be paying this money. So to the outside agencies and increasing some of these positions to full-time. We did that a little bit last year. And we were looking to try and think of, we did the stipend last year, so ways to recruit and retain. And so this is something we've been wanting to do. So it's really not new funding. We just now have funding to do it. Wonderful.
No, that's a really good point. Thank you.
I had a question. So this may or may not fit. So feel free to say this doesn't fit. But as we look at the question of, well, what's going to happen in year 4? The thought occurs to me as I'm listening to your presentation that, first of all, the whole concept of this 3-year master plan is so exciting. And what we're talking about is not your typical public school district. You know, if we can start to offer all these enhanced programs, social economic support, social workers support, fine arts, you know, after school programming and tutoring, is there the possibility of starting to market our district as really an extraordinary learning opportunity for students who are not enrolled here? Because if we can get more kids enrolling now and through the next 3 years, that additional ADA money could really make a huge difference and hopefully provide some long-term support going forward. Because, you know, the whole concept of which neighborhoods or which cities have good schools is heavily word of mouth. And once a district gets that reputation, then people want to move to that community to be in a good school district. So that's just a thought, you know, because that with that ADA money, that with significant numbers of students, we've got the capacity in our classrooms.
You're absolutely right.
So that's just a thought that occurs to me as I'm listening to what you're saying, as I'm seeing what we've got. This is not going to be a typical school district. I mean, it isn't now. But
You're absolutely
so.
right. And I would, you know, I would already tell you that even during the pandemic time, we had transfers in from Temecula because we were able to offer in-person instruction when they weren't. And parents that had kindergartners and first graders who said, I'm not a teacher and I can't, you know, to teach my child to read, they actually chose to drive here on an inter-district transfer because they were actually, so even just that small start, there was a group that came. I imagine, and I believe that through the work of, I didn't know if Seth was in here, Mr. Trench and the, you know, communications that he does. It really should be something that will be a focus of a not just a PR campaign, but there's a lot that we're doing that is so good that we need to get out there, that we truly need to do you know, something that it's hard to sometimes accept a compliment, you know, someone great, and you kind of, oh, no, let's be proud. Our kids deserve the best. And I am not afraid of, I won't say poaching, but if they want to come from other, you know, or private schools or charter schools or other districts, welcome. We welcome them here.
And we've seen a tremendous increase in our enrollment over the years as our programs have improved. You know, when Dr. Singh first came to Fallbrook 10 years ago, it was a district where people were leaving. And in fact, we had a pretty open policy about allowing them to leave. And then when I first came, that was the first year that the board policy had changed on inter-district transfers, that no, you had to have a valid reason for leaving. And now people are wanting to come to our schools. So you're absolutely right, Ms. Lundeen, word of mouth is it. And word of mouth is because you're offering great programs and kids are doing well. And that's talked about on the soccer fields, that's talked about in the baseball diamonds, it's talked about in the Bonds or Albertsons parking lot. So those are all ways that if you're, you know, build it and they will come. And if you are doing quality programming, people will come.
And I'm thinking Rotary, doing presentations to the Fallbrook Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, Fallbrook Women's Club. We should get on their schedules.
And we
Thank
do
you.
a lot with the Rotary clubs now. And you'll see when we bring the LCAP to you next month, that there's an actual action step about expanding our community relations with outside organizations and how they can
Great.
support our schools. So there's a whole action step dedicated to that.
Mr. Favela.
And then I think Mrs. Levis had something to
Adding
say.
to that, having the talking points, that we could share out. I mean, I know I'm friends of Fallbrook, or out of town are asking about local schools, and it'd be great to have that handy. Just so
That's a great
I know
idea.
Susan does a good job responding, or even having a page on the website why your students should attend our schools.
Absolutely.
Already have something ready to go when people visit the school, the website, they see it. So,
No, those are all great suggestions and things that some of them we've been thinking about already. And it's always great to hear other ideas and suggestions, because you're absolutely right. Someone's going to take more from what they might read off of a Facebook post or what their neighbor tells them, than going out and seeking themselves and reading a school accountability report card. And those are important and great and have value, but they're really, they're going to be, that interest is going to be drummed up by the, hey, my cousin lives in Fallbrook and they're
right.
getting to do this,
That's
that, and
right.
whatever.
Mhm.
How come we can't?
Right.
One other piece that I will add, Mrs. Lieber, thank you for reminding me, back to our original, the COVID contingency reserve, that was the dollar amount that was as of second interim, which was as of January 31st. I anticipate that dollar amount is going to increase and grow as we close the books on this year, and we do that over the summertime. Again, I might as well have it tattooed on me somewhere. Maximize our funds. When we close out the books, we do everything we can to legally spend our funds in compliance with how they need to be spent, but be smart about it and be strategic about it. So it frees up as much as we can to do the things we need to do. So I anticipate that dollar amount, that the $2.8 million that we have, that was as of January 31st, 21, will increase, will be a larger number as we close the books and come back, which only will then, if we decided, let's make it out a fourth year, or set aside things, or something like that, or take these components from it and have it a fourth year. And during this time, one of the other things is that you heard a lot of the proposals or suggestions from the governor's May revise. If additional funds come through that are intended to be used for things that we've already committed to for our 3-year plan, of course, we will use, again, that money and then be able to save our general fund money that then it can turn into a 4-year plan, or, a 3.5-year plan, or whatever we want to call it and look at it. So again, this is, I don't want to say worst case scenario, because this is a really good thing. This is if the minimum amount of money that we had to dedicate towards this, and it's money we already have. Anything else that comes on top of it is just additional, and will give us more opportunity to even enhance or strengthen or broaden what we're trying to do here with our learning recovery program.
So I have I guess a follow-up question to that. So the second bullet says that we have to supplement and not supplant. So if we had already started doing some things with our other money, is that considered, like the behavior specialist and the thing? So we started before this money came in. Can we still count that and not count it as supplanting it?
For the ELO grant, it's a little bit more restrictive.
Okay.
And so we've chosen things for the ELO grant that are relatively new. So we had 4 intervention texts, now we have 8.
Okay.
That's new. So.
Okay, so that's
we can't
not
pay for the
considered-
4, but we can pay for the new 4. Right?
Exactly. And if you look, the ELO grant is $3.6 million, and back a few slides when I said it's about $4 million that we have, if you took that dollar amount and divided it by 3, $4.1 million. So technically what you're going to see happening is the first year with all the new stuff, we're going to use our ELO grant, and we're going to spend it when it has to be spent. It has to be spent by the August of 22. So we'll be in compliance those ways, and we'll be spending it on new things. This one is the one that we cannot, again, that we can't supplant.
Mhm.
However, there was language because for districts that didn't lay off, like I mentioned, didn't have those same experiences and maybe didn't need to add additional, maybe they have all full-time special ed assistants already or whatever their case was. There is language that allows that you can pay for in that category. You can pay for your current paraprofessionals
Okay.
because you didn't go through a layoff process and reduce.
Right.
We're not choosing to do that. We're choosing to, add additional to meet this requirement here. But that was one little asterisk that was, by the way, that the state had to clarify for us. But no, that was a really good, excellent question.
The ESSER grant and some of those other ones can do what you were talking about.
Okay, yeah.
This particular one, you have to be a finance expert just to be able to keep track of
Can't
all
even
of these
imagine.
pots of money and where they are.
Well, I like doing this and I'm not afraid to ask the state, hey, what about this? It doesn't say that. What can we do? And get it in writing from them as well.
Yeah.
So I've got that in writing. Any questions or other questions or comments about just the funding source part before we move on to the next section?
So none of this is taking into account the mega cola
No,
that they talked about, or
No.
that GAN limit money.
no.
But that could all be additional on top of us. So
Correct.
exciting.
Right. And that's what I said. Even if it all, nothing else, we got not an additional penny of funding. We have this money, it's ours, and we could do this and do it for 3 years. So any of those other pots of money or proposals or whatever ends up coming out of the actual state adopted budget at the end of June will only be in addition to, and things that we can add other things or supplement, not supplant, but supplement this program as well.
I'm hopeful that, thinking about the 3-year and what happens at the end of that, the edge of that cliff, that when the public sees what a fully funded
Yeah.
public education looks like,
Yeah.
and hopefully all of, using research-based programs and effective programs, we're going to see improvements that will show if you invest in education, you get better results. So let's keep doing it. And hopefully we'll have a really good, sort of test case of this working, and people will support more education funding.
I think Mrs. Levis, that's what we're all
Hopeful.
I think that's
we
what
gotta do
we're
it
all
right,
very
which
hopeful
is-
for. We have to do it right, but public education has been underfunded for so long. And this pandemic really highlighted that, as well as highlighted the importance of our educational system and our economy.
Yeah, and one final comment on that, it just reminded me when you said that, Mrs. Levis, was that the part of this, and this is not a political statement at all, but part of this is related to the governor's recall situation that's currently going on right now.
Getting it done quickly.
So, putting money out there and it's because it's not just school districts, other agencies and in areas, really putting a lot of money out there. We, as school districts, benefit from that. And so it was kind of, somebody had mentioned at one of the meetings I was at, I think we should have a recall election every year because look what happens to education financing, and so, listen, however it comes about, whatever the purpose, whatever, brought it, just give us the money so we can do what we need to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Martin. Okay, we've come to kind of what the real crux of this meeting is all about now, and that is actually looking at the expanded learning grant, expanded learning opportunities grant. So I have listed here, there, as I said, lots of plans that we're in the process of either updating or writing or checking off a template, but there are only 3 that actually require the board to adopt them. The first one is the one that we're doing right now, the expanded learning opportunities grant. And then next month, I'll be bringing to you, if you remember, you had to approve at the beginning of the summer, the learning continuity and attendance plan, how we were going to address distance learning, blended learning, in-person learning. So you had to approve that. You'll have to approve an update on that. I have to give a report to you on that, as I've had to write to the state. That will be in addition to the LCAP annual update, which is a rather interesting concept when you think that LCAP was from 2 to 5 years ago, and we didn't even have it in the annual update last year. But I'll provide you an update to that plan. as well as then the new LCAP. So those things require your approval. This particular one, though, had to be approved by June 1st, hence the reason for the special board meeting. And then the other two, of course, have to be approved by June 30th. So we'll do those a first read. This one only requires one meeting, but the LCAP requires a first read as well as then public input and then a second read and adoption. So that's kind of the process that we're in right now. All righty, so you have in front of you a copy of the grant. Grant is such a funny word. It makes it sound like you applied for it. We didn't apply for it. You get this and you have to write this plan to go with it. The first thing that you will notice in this is that it's much smaller than the LCAP, right? And I will also tell you that I think it's 9 pages. 4.5 of those pages or 5 of those pages are the instruction on how to fill out the plan. So the actual plan is only about 5 pages, which is really, really nice. So I want to just kind of go through that a little bit with you. AB 86 provided this funding for the, as Mrs. Martin said, for the sole purpose of implementing a learning recovery program. So everything around it had to have to do with that mission. And it gave you 3 kind of broad areas that you could think about as you were planning for it. One of them could be supplemental instruction and materials. Certainly we knew that we needed some of those. Support for social emotional well-being, and food service, child nutrition services was also addressed in this grant that you could use the funding for those. So those were kind of the 3 broad categories. I'll talk in just a minute about how they break that down into 7 strategies, and you could choose from those 7 strategies, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So I just want to walk you through the plan so you know what you have in front of you. Page 1 and 2 is just a description of what the plan is on the top of page 1. And then page 1 and 2 is a section on the stakeholder engagement, all of the different meetings that we had to hold. We could use some of our stakeholder engagement from the LCAP, but then we also had to do additional input meetings specific to this funding. And we did those specific meetings through school site council meetings at each school and through PTA meetings. Different principals did it different ways. They also had to ask staff for input. So if we were going to be spending money on a learning recovery plan, what would that look like? And then in that same first section, then it asks you to identify what were the 4 strategies that you actually chose to spend your money on. I'm going to go through each of those in just a moment, but you can see the 4 there. We chose number 1, 2, 3, and 7, and I'll show you more about that in just a second. On the bottom of page 2 of your plan is you had to describe how will you identify which students need this learning recovery program. So there's 2 sections there, one on academic needs, how we would determine our students who needed academic needs. And then there's one on how we would determine which students needed social emotional learning needs. Those are both data driven. And if you notice, I'll just kind of highlight for you that in academic needs, we do the Renaissance 360. You've been hearing STAR 360, hearing us talk a lot about that. We'll be doing a presentation with you. Our students are just finishing up their spring assessments and doing makeups on that. That's the data point that we will use to determine which students need this learning recovery plan, as well as teacher recommendation and local assessments that we might do. And then for the social emotional, our panorama surveys that we did and our California Healthy Kids survey, as well as teacher recommendations, would be a way that we would be able to identify which students need that support. Okay. If you turn to page 3 of your plan, at the top of that, you needed to say, how will you be informing your students and your parents that these supports exist, and then even more importantly, how that your child qualifies for it. So there's a couple little sentences about that. One way obviously is through this board meeting. It's a public meeting, that's why they require it. Another way will be on our website. Certainly your principals will be talking about it in their meetings next year. And you'll be seeing it in Coffee and Conversations. Principals will be talking about it in their PTA meetings, as well as maybe any community forums that they do. And then the real crux of the plan is on the bottom of page 3 and into page 4, which are really explaining what the programs are that we're going to be doing for this particular grant. And I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit more detail. So that's kind of an overview of what the plan is. It's a very short plan in that respect, but there's a lot of meat in this plan. So if we look at the screen up here, as I said, there were those 3 broad categories, and then they broke that down into 7, what they call supplemental instruction and support strategies. Within the directions that you can go back and read later, which we have to include when we post that as the directions for the template. That's why it's actually part of the plan, not just because we thought you'd be interested, but it is actually part of the plan. That's why your plan says 1 of 9, even though the plan is only 5, it's 9 pages because you must include the directions. But in the directions, it gives you a little bit more information about what each of these 7 strategies are. But you can see the 7 there. We chose, as I said, 1, 2, 3, and 7. So extending instructional learning time, and I'll go through each of these in a moment as to exactly what that looks like. But of course, you can figure that one out pretty easy. Our summer bridge program, right? Our after-school interventions. Accelerating progress to close learning gaps. I'll talk about that in a moment. Integrated student supports to address other barriers that might be food scarcity or childcare or internet. So other barriers that are different than just a loss of academic instructional time. And then we chose number 7, which is professional development, staff training to enhance our student and family engagement in our schools. 4, 5, and 6, it doesn't mean those aren't important. And they are. And in fact, we're doing some of them. We just chose not to use this funding for it. So community learning hubs. We were already doing those. You remember we did our day camps last spring, starting them. So the kids who needed internet or needed daycare or needed support to access distance learning, we started that back in the spring last year. So we can't use this money for that, right? Because we were already doing that. But other schools might choose to use this money for that because they weren't. We just didn't. Number 5 is really more for the high school. Number 6, we could have used this. We did buy a new monitoring system, the Star 360, but we did that last spring, knowing that we wanted it in place for this year. So other school districts might just now be thinking about that. But so we didn't use this funding for that. So I just wanted to clarify. It's not that we're not doing them. It just, we already were doing them. Any question about the 7 strategies? And I'll go into more detail about what they
I
are.
have one quick question. It's a little off topic, but it came to mind based on community learning hubs and LCAP.
Mhm.
That is, we have a lot of technology in homes now, but we don't have really any support for parents to learn how to use technology. Is that something we could build into this, where we could have Saturday classes in some of our learning labs on a school site?
Mhm.
I mean, I do think it's a request that the LCAP have been making in the DLAC meetings, but I don't see us supporting that yet.
Thank you, Mrs. Lieber. Yes, that did come up very loud in our community meetings, and both from staff as well as parents, because staff, of course, want our parents trained too. We did a Google 101 boot camp for our parents this year. Last spring, we did a little mini one, and then this year we did one for them, and we recorded those, and they were placed on our website and sent out to our families as a way just to get them started. And it is in our current LCAP as well to continue offering those types of workshops for our families. And I think Saturdays is a great suggestion.
Sites.
I
At
think,
all
I think there
school
are
sites?
already things happening like that. I know Mr. Hino at Mayellis is
Oh,
doing
yes.
parent classes.
Yeah.
Just to
I think district-wide would be, now that especially almost every home has technology.
Yep. And I know, like I said, I know we offered them throughout the year, but it certainly is in our plan currently to offer them, continue to offer them. And it's something our parents have asked for. And not just the use of, but things like email and
Right.
Google Drive and some of those things. And now our parent portal, they're asking for it. And of course, every year they ask about digital citizenship and how do we help our children be safe. So we always offer something like that as well.
Also Peach Jar. I mean, we're sending so much information out. I don't think it seems to me there's a need for understanding how to access that document.
Perfect.
Great information. Thank you.
Okay, so let's just talk a little bit then about what's in each of those strategies. It's on page 3 and 4 of your plan. There's a little paragraph for each one, but just as a summary for you to kind of have an overview of it. As I said, strategy number 1 is the easy one. Extending instructional learning time. That's our summer bridge. We've not offered a summer bridge program in the past for our general education population. We had our migrant program and we had our extended school year for special ed, but this is new for our kids. So we can use this funding for that. To see how that kind of works now. and then our after-school tutoring, we could use this money for that too if we need to. So strategy number 2 is a little bit more complicated, and this is that one about accelerating progress to close that learning gap. Some of our students, of course, in the spring didn't have opportunities to learn new standards. Our standards this year were truncated in order to do essential standards. So we know that there are some gaps in our students' learning. So how are we going to fill those? You've heard nothing in this plan should be a surprise to you. These are all things that we've been talking about for months here, but this is the funding source that we've chosen. Our literacy coaches are going to be critical in this component, especially as we adopt a new reading language arts program. So our literacy coaches, the additional reading intervention teachers, we've had reading intervention teachers in the past, part-time in our schools, but we are allowing our schools to keep their part-time person, and we are adding a reading intervention teacher to every school of full-time so that they can support what we call, we always say that the best intervention is good first instruction. So that's our literacy coaches and our classroom teachers. We want them delivering the very, very best instruction possible. But then if we do have children who that isn't enough for, then we want our reading intervention teachers to be able to come in and backfill that. Also, we very much believe that literacy is the driver in all of our subject areas. You don't learn just to read in your reading class. We can use our innovation labs. We can use our other programs. We want to make sure that we're doing writing in our mathematics. So, but our innovation lab teachers, we're bringing them back, and we're excited about that. And they're going to be working very closely with our classroom teachers. Our classroom teachers will actually be co-teaching with them in the lab. So as we are introducing our new English language arts curriculum, our literacy coaches are already looking for, well, in the 6A, because we don't know which one is the K5 yet, but they are already looking for connections with science and things that we can bring into our labs as well. And then we are retaining 2 of our district TOSAs. We had 3 this year. We're retaining 2 of them to do that more of that authentic learning that we heard so much about in the Portrait of an 8th Grader with our parents, as well as in our feedback meetings and from our students, that our students want authentic learning opportunities. They want to apply their skills in real ways, solving real problems. And so that will be the focus of our 2 district TOSAs this next year, and using an existing curriculum that we purchased this last year to find learning. So those are the ways that we're choosing to use this funding. You will see in the LCAP, we have other things that we're going to be using to address this, because this is the crux of our existence for next year, certainly, and for every year. Any questions about those 2 before I move to number 3 and 4? Number 3 is that those other things that are barriers to our students' success, not just academic. Usually these fall under social emotional needs, socioeconomic needs, food scarcity. So as I mentioned a number of times, this is where we're looking to fund a social worker for our district, adding additional behavior technicians. Mrs. Martin already talked about the special education assistants, and then continuing our bulk meal service. Last year we were allowed to do that because of the way that the federal government reallocated the funding because of the pandemic, and we've been able to do that all this year. But that technically stops in June, but we will be able to continue that for our families with this funding, and that is actually called out in the directions as something that you can use this money for.
Right.
Nice.
Is the social worker the same as the counselor, or is that a separate?
No, it would be separate, Mrs. Levis. So we have our counselors, so we wouldn't be able to use this money to fund our counselors because we've had those in the past. But an area that the county, as we're working with them on so many things, getting our schools back open and successful, is this, and many districts have had a social worker, and I believe our district had a social worker a few years ago, but it's bringing in somebody to really coordinate those outside services. And we have a lot more children who are accessing those services now.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, to begin with, this upcoming year, that social worker position, if you recall from the migrant education plan, when Dr. Curcio had talked about that, we're looking at split funding this position, where the migrant program perhaps couldn't afford a full-time. And in this grant, we've used it, you can see in all these ways, but you take part of that money and part of this money. And yes, that social worker will serve, of course, the students and the families that are in the migrant program. but it's only funded for partially by the migrant program, which then they can serve other students and other family members that maybe not qualified for the migrant
That's great.
program. But to do these things, and our counselors have been doing a phenomenal job of really trying to help the families align with services, but there's so many services that are available that
Yeah.
it's not something necessarily in the educational side of the house that to know about or to be the experts on. So getting an actual social worker person who really can connect those families with not just what the school district offers, but other services that can help them with housing and food and health insurance and things. There's just so much more that's out there that hiring somebody who is the expert in that area will really benefit our students and our families beyond just what our own counselors have done. But they've done a phenomenal job of being helpful there. for our
And
families.
more of those services are being offered now. And more grants are out there for people to offer those services. And so the county actually has a hub, if you will, of social workers that then network and communicate and work
So
together.
is that where we hire from? They just know about the county resources?
And then once you have a social worker, then they're locked into that group. Very similar to like when Mrs. Martin mentioned that she has her CBO group. I have my curriculum and instruction group. They have a group for social workers that share resources and share best practices.
I think it's going to be such a critical position because you're talking about creating more stability in the home environment. Key things like, do you have a, shelter? Do you have serious medical issues within the family? Those kids aren't going to be focusing well in school if there's that kind of a traumatic family environment. And quite honestly, schools are being asked to do more than just education. And as you put well, a counselor is not necessarily a person who really has, or, that's not a world that they should be asked to navigate. So I think it's a terrific idea. I don't know how a half-time position is going to handle it.
Well, it'll
all,
be a
but
full-time
it's a good-
position, just.
Well,
but
migrant,
only
yes.
one.
Yeah. But I think it's a terrific start. So
Yeah, we do too.
kudos on that.
And then the last strategy that we have there is professional development. Fallbrook has a very strong belief system that if you're going to do something, you better make sure people are well trained to do it. And so our staff, as I mentioned before, Mr. Rodriguez has already begun scheduling trainings for our counselors as well as our classroom teachers and our behavior PBIS teams in two very effective practices. Trauma-informed practices and restorative practices, which are ways to work with children who have not maybe making the best choices, in addition from a punitive way, but in a way that then allows them to make better choices next time and save dignity and have respect. Which then hopefully increases their chance of positive behavior in the future. And then we're excited this year to be able to offer the 7 habits for successful families. We, as you know, have our 7 habits that we give to all of our teachers, 7 habits of effective people, not teachers, all staff. In fact, we receive that training when they're hired in Fallbrook. And then we have our leadership teams, our lighthouse teams at our schools. Where one of the things that our families asked for was really authentic professional developments that help them facilitate a school to home connection. And as you heard from our presentation from May Ellis, they have a very strong lighthouse team with their parents. And so one of the things that we've talked about is bringing back the 7 habits for successful families. So we will have a team of trainers trained, and then they will be able to provide that training back at their school sites.
Can we get a copy of just that slide because it isn't really reflected, all those
Yeah, that is
services
a good
and things
idea.
in our handout, just that slide.
You can have
I would
both
take a
of them.
picture right now if I
Gotcha.
could, but.
We'll get it for you. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
but you don't have to
It's a
send the
public
whole
document,
presentation, but
absolutely.
that really helps us.
Those should all be in here. What did I miss?
I
Is there
think
something
I
not
think
in
it's
there?
the format.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
But For
Yeah.
example, the 7 habits, staff and that's not listed here in strategy number 7.
Well, you know what? I will make an edit to that because it should be.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I will.
Okay,
that
so
would be
then it all
handy.
is
It should
here.
all be in there. Okay.
Okay.
I'm like, if it's not in there, I'm in trouble.
So is this something you're still working on? It hasn't been submitted?
I'm submitting it to you right now. So I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah,
bummed
yeah.
about that, actually.
Go back to page 2 then, because it talked about the 4 strategies, and in your sentence, you
Oh,
say
it
the
says
3
3.
strategies.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that would be a good chart to include.
Yeah.
It's well laid
I
out
can't
too.
include that chart in this.
Oh, no worries.
No,
because
but
it's
just for
just
us,
percentages.
Yeah,
as
yeah.
talking points for us, so we know the
Yeah.
program.
We can expand it
Mhm.
into-
So you said that it's a grant is a misnomer because we get the money regardless, but so what if they don't like this? I mean, I'm sure they will, but do they come back and say, no, you can't use money for that, you have to find something else,
So
or?
what will happen on both the in-person instruction grant and the ELO grant was that it's the assumption the state is making is that all districts are going to do this. Now, we happen to know that all districts are not going to do this, and I've heard from other
Mhm.
districts who said, we're not even going to bother opening this year. The year was almost over, and I thought, how can you do that? Number one, to your kids and families, but you're also then on the business side, you're giving away, you're leaving a lot of money on the table there. What will happen is every district is required to certify we did open or we didn't open or what date we opened, and then this as well. And since the allocations have already been made to districts, the state will be taking this money back.
Mhm.
So it's a grant, they call it grant because basically I say they're granting us the money and granting us with the strings attached to it. But this one is an interesting one because again, the expectation is that schools will open and that we will provide this learning recovery program and, beyond that. It's been interesting because I've not seen it where you will do this, although we know that not everyone is going to, and they're going to already pay, and then they're going to take the money back if you don't. If a school, back to the in-person instruction grant, for example, the requirement was to open by April 1st. And for every day that they weren't open by April 1st, there was a penalty imposed. So maybe they weren't going to open until May 1st, or maybe, they were still getting that allocation, but then there was a penalty fine for every day that you hadn't done it from April 1st. So it is ours, it's everybody's, but the expectation is that you're going to do these things.
Okay.
Just gonna make those quick edits. So there were only 3 strategies till yesterday. That was.
Well, I had it
Look at it
combined.
going,
We
okay,
had it
that- I
combined.
know. We had
I
the
like it.
professional development one. There's also, you can also embed that into strategy 2 or 3. I think there's a place where you can do professional development in that. So we had originally put it in there, but then as Mrs. Martin and I talked about it more, we said, you know what, it has a whole separate thing for PD. Let's just put it there. So, and I did in my edits on my sheet have 3 crossed out. I just didn't go back and do it. So I apologize.
I don't know if this is the time to ask this question, but earlier in the presentation, it was mentioned that after-school tutoring
Mhm.
would be a component of this. And I just wonder if I can ask who's going to provide it and who will receive it and what subject areas.
So we've been doing that currently. Our own teachers are providing after-school intervention right now. Every teacher is doing it right now because we have a shortened day. And so during their contracted day, they're actually working with their most at-risk kids 4 days a week. It was the recommendation of our teachers on our curriculum meeting that we continue to offer that next year, not to the same degree, not requiring every teacher to do it because it will be outside of their contracted day, but that we would allow our own teachers to be paid hourly rate in order to extend their day to offer this to students, whether it be in their classroom or their grade level or at their school.
Which is so great that it's, it's not an aid, it's not a volunteer, it's
That's
the
right.
best.
It's a well-trained.
That's right. We want our most expert staff working with our most at-risk kids.
And who know the kids and know, they see them in the classroom and they know where their deficits
Our
are.
teachers have just, they have seen the results in front of them of this small group time with their kids and how important it has been and what growth they've seen. So they specifically asked if there would be something that we could do for that. And it's in our LCAP as a strategy.
Is there a transportation issue with kids staying after school,
It's
getting
the
home?
hardest piece.
Good question.
Mhm.
It's been
Is
the
there a
will be
way
the hardest
to,
piece.
with this funding, to run a little bus around to take care of that?
We do, for some of like the Duluth families, we often consider how we can transport them and do provide that. It's something that, again, if we have the available resources, and in this case, I would say it's not just necessarily the money, it's the bus drivers.
Mm-hmm.
If we have the staff to be able to do this, absolutely, it's an eligible use of the fund or something that, you know, we might even pay for using a different funding source. Because transportation, as we knew, but we really found out it's a significant issue in this community. And so, you know, it's kind of like I said, it doesn't do any good to have all these great things if parents aren't able to access it because it's a transportation issue. You know, and so we do try and consider the entire, like, so how are they going to get there? How are they going to get home? How are we going to feed them? You know, not just the program itself. But for transportation, again, it's going to be one of the, there's a nationwide shortage of bus drivers. And so we're doing our best and we're doing a good job of recruiting and making sure we have enough. But if we don't have enough to be able to provide it for all, then we start to prioritize who are, you know, which students are the neediest or which are the greatest distance or whatever factors we use to make that determination that we would prioritize it. But absolutely, if we can do it for all of them or the most, we absolutely will.
Thank you.
I wrote this down for you. 7 habits of effective people,
And that's
including 7 habits. Gotcha. And we'll print it for us. Okay. So next steps. Well, the first thing you have to do is adopt this plan with the edits so noted. And then we're doing them as we speak, and Pam will make copies of them. But essentially, it will say 4 strategies, and it will include in there the 7 habits of effective people, including 7 habits of successful families. So that's the first thing that has to happen. And then, of course, we're going to continue to implement it. We're already in the process of doing a lot of these things, but we'll continue to implement what we have and then begin planning for the things for fall. The next steps for us is preparing the final draft of the LCAP. So Ms. Martin and Dr. Curcio and I have a meeting this afternoon with the county office. We submitted our draft plan to them 10 days ago. And so they have been reviewing that for edits that they will be making suggestions to us about today. We had a meeting with DLAC and ELAC the other night in which the draft goals and actions were presented to them and input was received, and we'll be editing that document to bring to you. It'll come to you on 6/7 as a first read. We will try and get it to you earlier because unlike this 9-page plan or 5-page plan, the LCAP is many pages. And it will be shorter than it has been in the past. It looks like maybe it's about, I'm going to guess maybe around 60 pages instead of
Wow.
75 or 80. So that's good. And,
Or 130,
or
I think we were up
130.
to it.
And the main reason is because this particular one won't have an annual update in it. It's just the new plan. But you will receive an annual update of the old plan. So that will be in addition to the LCAP. So you'll have the new LCAP. You'll have an annual update of the old LCAP, which will include an annual update to the learning continuity and attendance plan. So you will have a lot of reading to do.
So you're going to get it to us in advance of the.
We're going to try. Yeah. So we're like I said, it's all a timeline of waiting for all of these different stakeholder groups that have to approve it, including the county. But we will get that today. That's what we'll be working on the end of this week and into next week. So yeah, it is our hope to get that to you as soon as possible.
Mrs. Norby, could we get it in both electronic version and paper? version?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
So we can mark up our paper, but refer back to electronic.
Yep. And remember, when you receive it, it's a first reading. So you actually
Right.
have 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Right. So, so
Thank you.
that's another reason for that, but absolutely. Yes. We print it for ourselves as well.
I've got papers in front of me now.
Any, and then of course, implementation of the LCAP. That's what we will start to do. Any questions about any of what we've just shared with you and the process of all of these plans?
I think we're ready to
Okay.
I'm happy to make a motion that we adopt. ELO.
read the motion, if you don't mind. Can I?
I move that we adopt the
Expanded learning.
expanded learning opportunity grant plan.
Excellent.
A second.
Okay, so now, any more discussion?
I just wanted to go back to Ms. Lundine's comment about marketing and
Yes.
and what Mr. Fell pointed out is as board members, that's really one of the
Mhm.
best ways that we can support the district and help You know, education is such people have such a long history, and you'll see people on social media and stuff talking about, well, my kid went to Fallbrook and, 30 years ago and it was terrible. And it takes a long time to change that mindset. And, anytime that we're in public sphere, even just talking to friends and neighbors, that we can really cheerlead for the district. It's good. It is good to have talking points. And I think when I first started on the board, I asked for those too, but, we know better than most community members what's going on around here. And we have great examples here of things that we're doing that aren't happening even in districts next door, that we can, anytime education comes up, we can talk about our one-to-one technology and our counselors and our nurses and just all the great things that we're doing. And, when we go to CSBA, we hear about these best practices that are like, leading edge of education. We're doing all of them, but people in the community don't know that, even if they have kids in school. My kids never tell me what they do at school. So, but we know a lot of those things, and the more we can get out there in the public and really, like Ms. Martin said, be proud of what we're doing here and share that with people. That's a great use of our platform, I think.
Absolutely. And I believe Dr. Singh had shared with you in her last update about our building the relationship we have with the Village News and starting to have regular positive articles highlighting some of the things that we do. And that's a great piece to be able to have. Unfortunately, sometimes the only news that you read is when somebody does something wrong or not popular or whatever, juicy gossip. That's what makes the paper. So having the good things highlighted that we're doing is a great way to advertise that. But I know that it is something that we're working on. Hopefully after the budget and the LCAP part is, we kind of talked about, I think this brochure type of thing that has some simple, really, here you go, that you could have as a board member and carry around with you, but also whether I've seen districts that the real estate agents have them as families are looking to do.
We did one like 4 years ago.
We did it. And I think, it just needs to be updated because so much we've done, but that's a easy, great way to be able to reference it, providing it to the new teachers at their new teacher orientation, of course, in the families packets as they register for school. But then, like you said, outside organizations, not just our own groups that we have here or our employees here, but getting that on the outside really will be beneficial as well to promoting what we're doing here.
The Chamber of Commerce, and this is when everything gets fully reopened, Chamber of Commerce has a wall where they have little inserts that businesses and nonprofit organizations put these takeout in, somebody walks in and they just take these out. And when I was president of Newcomers, we did one, it was just kind of highlighted pictures. And we got so many people who contact us and said, hey, we want to be members. And it was just because they were new to Fallbrook, they stopped in the chamber office and they saw it. So something like that might work too.
No, that's great. Those are all great suggestions. We are trying to use some of the things that we do now, like the bulk meal services for parents when we want to communicate something, because they're coming through and, so if we're handing them the food, here's also the flyer or the information under.
Great way to get them information now. Excellent.
I was hoping we could pass out job applications for bus drivers.
Bus drivers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
A reward
Drive a
program,
drive a
$50.
bus.
$50.
I think a lot of them would be interested.
It's just getting the information out there.
know. They don't
Exactly.
know.
Exactly.
Pachenda's offering $1,000 bonus to go back to work there.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pala.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
in the Village News. So not that we should do that, but getting the word out is so important. And, there's people looking for work.
Absolutely.
One last question I had is on the music program. It's not in this plan, but will it be in a future plan that will be?
It's in the LCAP.
Okay.
It is, and it's actually been there for the last time too. And we've done some things over the years
Right,
to
at
be able to do
Mayellis.
that. Well, across our district, we did the luminary arts across our
Right,
district,
that's
every
true.
grade level
That's true.
received something with that. We did Kids College, and then we also did we partnered with Cast here in town and did a band program for our sixth graders before the COVID last year. So we've done some things, but we just never really had the funding to do something At one point, we had a halftime band teacher in our budget, but we couldn't find one. So we've done a variety of different things, but one of the, as I said before, that we're exploring is this partnership with Luminary Arts. We know they have a quality program. We know they have staff.
Right.
And
They're doing all the interviewing and all.
yeah, so I think that we can actually provide something very robust and very substantial for our students with this partnership. And we're very excited about that. And that really was, as we've begun to think about some of this new funding that may be coming our way.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have a first and a second, and I think we've asked and answered most of the questions, even some that weren't relevant, I asked. So now let's take a vote. Mrs. Lopez, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Mrs. Lundin? Aye. And Mr. Favela?
Aye.
And Mrs. Rivas?
Aye.
And I vote aye. 5-0. Let me see, the acronym is the ELOW passes.
Thank you so much. I just want to finish by saying the business office and the curriculum and instruction office have to work so closely together. Now, some districts like Fallbrook have always done that, but now it really is required. And I just want to publicly acknowledge how great it's been to work with Mrs. Martin on all of these plans. So it's a real partnership, and we have to be in sync and knowing what we're doing. And there's so many of the plans that she has to do a little part first, and then I have to respond to,
Yes.
or I have to, and then she has to.
Yes,
And,
with all those
and-
questions you have to ask before you can even spend the money properly. So
So it's
Well, we
been a
laughed
pleasure.
at, thank you, Ms. Darby, and I would say the same goes for you. We laughed Friday night as we were texting and emailing each other at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. One, we need to get a life.
I said, do we not have a life?
But two, it was not a problem. I'm working on something, she's working on something, just to communicate, and she's watching the Padres game, and I've got my husband sitting next to me watching as we're doing this. But it really, we are very fortunate. We've mentioned it before, but we are very fortunate that we've always, since the time I've been here, at least it's been my experience that that's how this district has functioned with, it's not in a silo,
Yeah.
working side by side. So the transition that started with the LCAP and LCFF way back when, it wasn't a difficult transition for us because we were already doing that. But I think it helps with getting the results that we have now and being able to offer what we're able to offer when you have on the same page from the beginning and understanding what the other's doing. So it's been very, very good to work with you on this as well.
And
your
of course,
department.
thank you to the board for always your support and your input and allowing us to bring to you the plans that we put together based on all of that input. We appreciate your support.
Well, I
For
want
all
to just
your
say,
work on it.
I
Excuse
want to
me.
just say for the record that the work you've done is outstanding and I think extraordinary. And we are so lucky to have you and your teams. So fortunate. So thank you.
It is
You
a
make
team,
us
no
so
doubt.
proud.
It's only
Easy for
5
us to-
pages, but it's a
I
lot.
know, right,
I know.
And I have fresh ones hot off the press that I'll bring over to you.
Oh, fresh off the press. That's who.
The two
Wow,
edits.
I'm
See, while we were
impressed.
talking, we still made the changes.
Oh my
You do
gosh.
not have time for moss to grow on your stones. Thank you. Yeah, so we will now adjourn the meeting at 10:35, I guess, or 10:38. The meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.